AJ Smith-Shawver climbed up the ranks quickly in 2023, making his debut. What are the plans for him in 2024 and beyond, or could he be used as part of a big trade this offseason? We'll discuss all that on today's episode of Locked On Braves, so let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on social media at ShortstopBall. Also, make sure you check out my written work over at BravesToday.com, where I post an article just about every day over there, as well as doing a podcast here with you every day. Make sure you follow the podcast on social media as well at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback you have for the podcast. If you're new and watching here on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Also hit that thumbs up button to help support the show. Thank you so much for all your support at Locked On Braves. Whether you're an everydayer, first-time listener, thank you so much for stopping by, giving us a shot here. Hopefully you stick around and join this great Locked On Braves community during the offseason. I do just about all of these episodes live as well, usually starting around 9 Central, 10 Eastern. If you want to join, right now we have Eric Peterson, Dave McIntyre, Nick C., Kenneth McHenry, Leland Hurt, Nick C., again, Ethan on here, Jeffrey, Peter D'Amico, and Gary Gibson, as well as Philip Worley joining us live. Thank you so much for joining live or watching the replay. Appreciate all your support here at Locked On Braves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's podcast, it is a Minors Monday episode, and we are going to be talking about the Braves' top overall prospects, at least according to MLB Pipeline, AJ Smith-Shawver, who we saw make his debut. And in addition to that, I'm only going to talk about AJ Smith-Shawver today. Typically, I do 2 players, but I'm only going to focus on him because I want to have a further trade discussion. And could he be part of a trade? Do the Braves have to include him or Hurston Waldrop in order to get a deal done? So we're going to talk about that. And then we'll also get into the news of the day. Had several signings happening on Monday, including a potential Braves target in Sonny Gray. So we got to talk about all that, where the Braves go next, what are their best options. So we'll get on all of that conversation on today's podcast. But let's start with AJ Smith-Shawver. 7th round pick by the Braves in 2021 out of Colleyville, Texas. 6'3", 205-pound right-handed pitcher. Turned 21 this past November, so made his debut this past season at 20 years old. Became the youngest Braves starter to win a game since Steve Avery. So some really good stats there for AJ Smith-Shawver. Very young, coming up, getting his first win and showing a lot of good signs and doing some good things at the big league level. When he was drafted, considered a raw prospect with big upsides. He didn't really start pitching until his senior season in high school. He's a two-way player, was going to go to Texas Tech for play quarterback for the football team and play for the baseball team as well. But the Braves went over slot for him in that 7th round. We're able to get him in the system. And since then, he's been somebody that a lot of people have been excited about. And he showed you why in 2023. But after getting drafted, just 4 games started at the FCL level, 8 1/3 innings, only 4 hits allowed, but 10 walks and 16 strikeouts, showing you the good and the bad with AJ Smith-Shawver in a short sample size. Came back in 2022, got 17 starts, all at single A, a lower single A level, 68 2/3 innings, only 54 hits, again, not giving up a lot of hits, but 39 walks and 103 strikeouts. So not a lot of hits, a lot of walks, a lot of strikeouts, led to a 5.11 ERA and a 1.35 whip. Then this past year, started at high A Rome, 14 innings, only 6 hits, 4 walks, 23 strikeouts, and no earned runs. They quickly moved him up to double A, where he got 2 starts, 7 innings pitched, 5 hits, 3 walks, 9 strikeouts, no earned runs. You got to remember at double A this year, they had those tacked baseballs in the first half of the season. And a lot of organizations were having some of their top prospects skip that level because they didn't want them fooling around with those tacked baseballs. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, because once they called him up to AAA, it wasn't long before he was up for the big league level. So I just think the Braves were super aggressive with AJ Smith-Shawver in 2023, right or wrong, and we can have that discussion and talk about that. But he did get overall 10 starts at AAA, 41 innings, only 26 hits allowed. So again, not a lot of hits, but 26 walks, 47 strikeouts. That's a 4.17 ERA and a 1.27 WHIP. And then he also pitched in 6 games at the big league level, started 5 games, 25 and a third innings pitched, only 17 hits. You're noticing a theme here. Doesn't give up a lot of hits. 11 walks, 20 strikeouts, a 4.26 ERA, and a 1.11 WHIP. Now, the decision by the Braves to be super aggressive with a kid who was 20 years old, hadn't pitched a lot at the high school level, hadn't pitched a lot professionally, the handling of him in 2023 was odd, I think, to say the least. The way the Braves just pushed him through every level the way that they did. And we obviously talked about this during the season. I think part of this was out of necessity with all the injuries the Braves had in the starting rotation. You know, they felt like they were running out of options, and AJ Smith-Shawver was the best option. And this team is in win now mode, so you're going to put your best option up there. I don't think they would do it if they didn't feel like he was ready. You do kind of wonder what that means for him long term. You've now put him on the 40-man roster. You've started his service time clock and all of that. Again, I think he was ready. I don't think it hurts him in the long run. It's great to get that experience, but I think ideally you would want your 20-year-old top pitching prospect to go through each level, work through some of the kinks at each level, and get better before getting to the big league level. And look, he was dominated at the minor league level last year when they called him up, so I understand it, but there certainly are some things to work on. We'll get on that. We'll get into that here in a second. Well, let's just talk about the stuff for AJ Smith-Shawver. Fastball that touches upper 90s, mostly sits 94, 97. One of the key things for him is being able to hold that velocity throughout. Typically, he begins the game a lot of 96 plus. There was one start he was even hitting 100, but then later in the game, he's sitting more 93, 94. So one thing for him going forward, can he maintain that velocity throughout? It's a big question on Spencer Strider. When he came up, is could he hold that velocity throughout? And he's made some adjustments there, maybe dialed it back a little bit at times in the beginning of the game to save some of that for big spots or later in the game. So I think that's something AJ Smith-Shawver is going to have to figure out. Slider sits in the mid 80s, very good horizontal break on it, best secondary pitch at the moment. However, I was impressed with the changeup that I saw for him, and a very key pitch for him to have something that's running away from lefties, and that's mainly who he uses the changeup against, is the lefties. But it's highly effective pitch when located, as most pitches are. But a small sample size at the big league level, he only threw 48 changeups, had a 50% whiff rate on those changeups, and batters were over 4. Again, very small sample size on changeups that were put in place. So, I was impressed by the changeup and the looks that I had. So I think that's a pitch for him that's going to be very important, like I said, to have something moving glove side or arm side rather, like that, having that changeup with that slider and that fastball up in the zone. Throws a curveball at 77. It has some wicked break to it, but he has almost no control over that pitch. So those are his 4 pitches right now. Again, the fastball, slider, I think changeup are his best 3 pitches, even though he threw that curveball a little bit more when he came up. But that's his pitch mix right now. They all have the potential to be really good pitches, but there are some things to work on, and the most obvious is control. Not even really command. I'm not even asking for command at this point. I'm just asking for control, because I think if he can get better control of each of these pitches, show that he can throw them for strikes and throw them for strikes more regularly, because they are such good pitches that are hard to square up. If he can just get them in the zone, it's not only going to help him, limit his walks, get batters out, go deeper into games, but it's going to help him get those chase pitches out of the zone at the big league level. You saw his strikeout rate severely dropped at the big league levels, because those hitters are going to know how to lay off some of those pitches out of the zone, even those pitches that have really good movement. He threw some really good sliders at the big league level that fell just off the plate, and big league hitters were spitting on those. You don't get that at the minor league level. So being able to have that control, being able to throw his pitches in the zone more often is definitely going to help him. That is the biggest key for him becoming a top of the rotation pitcher. There was never in one of his starts that I was watching did I think he's really got good control of this pitch. I mentioned the start, I believe it was against the Cubs, where he had that changeup working, and almost every time he was throwing it on the outer half to lefties. It was the only time, even his fastball, that I was watching AJ Smith-Shawver, and I said, okay, he has really good control of this pitch today. That is definitely something he's got to work on, but once he does, I mean, the sky is the limit for this kid. Holding that velocity deep in the games, already touched on that, is another thing he needs to work on. Limiting the homers, 7 home runs allowed in just 25 and a third innings in the big leagues. A high home run rate and a high walk rate is not going to cut it. As good as your stuff may be, if you're doing those two things regularly, you're not going to have a lot of success. Amazing. He had the success that he did with the high home run rate and the high walk rate that he had at the big league level. And then just more experience. He's still only thrown 164 and a third innings professionally after not pitching much in high school. He just needs more reps. And I think AJ Smith-Shawver can be, again, a top of the rotation type of arm. He has the stuff. He has that potential. And if everything clicks, especially if the fastball velo can be maintained and you get the control of these pitches, I think you're looking at a potential number one starter. I think that is the ceiling for AJ Smith-Shawver. So that's what I think the future is for him. Plans in 2024. I think there's, two ways you can go with it. Knowing the Braves, they'll go with the third way that nobody's thought of. But I think ideally he goes back to Gwinnett, continues to work on the things previously mentioned. He's already on the 40-man roster, so he's there if you need him. But I try to hold off as much as possible. Let him get another 10 or 15 starts at the minor league level to continue working on those things. If he's just absolutely dominating at that point, go ahead and bring him up. But I think ideally you start him in Gwinnett, let him continue to get some reps under his belt. You could go the Strider route, start him in the bullpen, limit his innings, bring him in, pitch 2-3 innings every now and then maybe bring him into the rotation later in the year, and you can allow him to continue to work on those things at the big league level and then mix him into the rotation. I don't think that's necessary with AJ Smith-Shawver because of all the bullpen options you already have. I would rather just see him go to Gwinnett and work on those things, but that's also what I said about Spencer Strider going into 2022, and look how that worked out. But I also think Strider's a different situation. He was an older player. I think he was more prepared and ready for that transition. I don't think that AJ Smith-Shawver is quite there yet. If I had to guess, he starts the year at AAA. But again, he goes there. He works on a couple of those things we talked about. I think he very well could be back in the rotation at some point in 2024 and hopefully there to stay unless he is traded. And while I don't think that will happen, it could be a possibility if the Braves make a big splash this offseason. We'll discuss trade scenarios here next. Get in on all the action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers are getting $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. Getting ready to purchase those Christmas presents? Well, here's how you can get a little extra dough to help with that. That's $150 if your team wins. You've been thinking about joining FanDuel. There's no better time to get in on the action. You got NFL, NBA, NHL, all going on right now. The app is easy to use. They have a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And right now, you want to get in on that action. 49ers, Eagles, and Chiefs are your Super Bowl favorites at the moment. And your Falcons, after the big win this past weekend, are now plus 100 favorites to win the NFC South. Judging by my Twitter feed, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing for where the Falcons are, but those are your betting favorites for the NFC South over on FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season, or get in on the NFL season that's halfway through now. Also visit FanDuel.com/playsafe for tools and resources to help you stay in control of the way you play. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. I want to tell you about Locked On Sports 24/7 as well. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, getting back into this AJ Smith-Shawver conversation, posted a question on Twitter on Monday, or X, that's posed the question, would you include AJ Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop in a trade for a frontline starter? And I think if the Braves are going to get a deal done, and we talked a lot about Dylan Cease, you're probably going to have to give up one of those two guys. Those are your two best trade chips, along with Vaughn Grissom. And I just think if there's a big trade to be made, you're going to have to give up one of those guys. Most of you said AJ Smith-Shawver. And I think if it's me, and this is me talking, I think I would trade AJ Smith-Shawver before Waldrop as well. Waldrop's already proven he can maintain that velocity. AJ Smith-Shawver has not. He has good control of a plus-plus splitter. I don't know that AJ Smith-Shawver has great control over any of his pitches at the moment. I just feel more confident in Waldrop being a big part of the rotation in 2025 than I do AJ Smith-Shawver. And I think both could be. And I certainly love both guys. I think both have number one type potential. I think it's also that Waldrop's a little bit older, so we're seeing the near final product to look at. But as we discussed last week when we went over Waldrop, he has his own command issues as well that can elude him at times. I just feel like Waldrop's maybe a little bit more of a polished product than AJ Smith-Shawver is. But again, both have huge upside potential. But I think I'd probably move AJ Smith-Shawver. If you can get a trade done for a Cease or a Burns or a Glasnow, I wouldn't give up much for Glasnow, as we talked about last Friday. But if you can get any of those guys without giving up AJ Smith-Shawver, Hurston Waldrop, then would be truly, truly amazing. But I think you'd have to part with one of those guys. And then the issue becomes, could one of those guys be just as good as the player you're trading for in a couple of years and then be part of the rotation for 5, 6, 7 years, however long they stay healthy and stay effective? That's the real dilemma here. I think if you're Alex Anthopoulos, is weighing the now, maybe getting more of a known quantity. And look, Dylan Cease has his warts as well. He had a tough year this past season. The velocity was down. It's not like he's a perfect product, but it's somebody that we've seen pitch at a Cy Young level at the big league level. We haven't seen that from AJ Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop yet. We're hoping that they can be that, but we know that Dylan Cease has been that. We know Corbin Burns has been that. Do you trade for the more immediate, or do you hope that those guys get to that level in a couple of years and then you have that 1-2 punch with Spencer Strider at the top of the rotation? So it's definitely a tough choice. I'm glad I'm not a GM, but if you're not going to pay these big free agent prices, and it looks like the Braves are not, then you're going to have to go the trade route, and you're going to have to give up something in order to get something. Article on Fox Sports, they listed the 9 starting pitchers who could be traded. They listed Tyler Glasnow. We talked about him on last Friday's podcast, mailbag episode, and I said then I wouldn't give up much for him unless they want to attach a left fielder to him, or maybe a Randy Arozarena. That probably becomes a little bit even too expensive for the Braves, but I wouldn't personally not give up much for Glasnow. And as I said last Friday, even if I did, I would put him in bubble wrap and make sure that he is healthy and ready for the postseason. Corbin Burns, he's a Boris client, likely will cost a top prospect, and you won't be able to extend him. Similar for Dylan Cease, he's going to cost you a top prospect, is a Boris client, so likely won't extend. And in my mind, you can't trade AJ Smith-Shawver and Hurston Waldrop for a Cease or a Burns and not extend them, because then you're just in the same boat, next year or 2025 if you're getting Corbin Burns, or 2026 if you're getting Dylan Cease. And like I said, AJ Smith-Shawver, Hurston Waldrop could be those guys and be ready at that point. So again, the trade route is not foolproof either. There are definitely some issues going that route. They mentioned Shane Bieber. That's a no thanks for me. Same for Paul Blackburn. Logan Gilbert is one that's very interesting because you have a lot of control over him. He gives you a lot of innings. I think he's probably more of a number 3 starter. I just don't know what the Braves could offer him. Certainly Grissom would have to headline that package. You may have to include a Marcelo Zuna in there to give them an immediate bat. I don't know what the Braves would be able to offer offers the Mariners for a Logan Gilbert. As some has mentioned, you may have to give up one of your good contracts at the major league level, like an Ozzie Albies, which is not going to happen. I'm just saying that's probably what you would have to do to get a Logan Gilbert. They mentioned Alek Manoah. No thanks. Ryan Pepiot for the Dodgers is interesting. He's a prospect I really like. It's just hard for me to see those two teams hooking up on a deal that's beneficial to both. Clark Schmidt from the Yankees, another interesting one, depending on the asking price. If they're not asking for too much, he's controllable through 2027. He has good command, and the Yankees aren't exactly great at developing pitchers, so maybe the Braves get him, help him unlock some things, and he becomes a solid middle of the rotation pitcher. Again, I'm not saying they need to go after him in any way, but definitely kick the tires, see what the asking price is. If you can get him without giving up, too much, I certainly think he could be a solid piece in the rotation that you have some control over. So those are some of the guys that they list as potential trade targets for the starting rotation this offseason. But again, I hesitate giving up either AJ Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop, because whoever you're trading for, you have to extend them, because AJ Smith-Shawver, Hurston Waldrop could be those guys in 2 years if they develop, stay healthy the way that we think that they can. All right, next we'll get into the news of the day, including talking about Sonny Gray and his deal with the St. Louis Cardinals, an option many people thought the Braves might be in on, but he goes to St. Louis. We'll discuss that and where the Braves might go elsewhere next. Want to remind you again about the Locked On National Sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you, covering 24/7 national sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever National Sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, a lot of news coming out on Monday, and the headliner being Sonny Gray signing a 3-year, $75 million deal with the St. Louis Cardinals. And the St. Louis Cardinals have now made 3 starting pitching moves this offseason, and interesting ones. You look at their rotation now, it's a lot of veterans in there. Don't know how I feel about it if I were a Cardinals fan, but hey, they've gone out, they've made some moves. The Sonny Gray one. You all know, if you've been listening, I was not particularly high on the Braves getting Sonny Gray. For whatever reason, this is a feeling thing. It's not necessarily based in any stats, although you look at his expected stats, not nearly as good, obviously, as what he performed this last season, but he's just always struck me as more of a number 3 starter who every now and then pitches like a top of the rotation pitcher. And with somebody that's going into their mid-30s, coming off a career year, that makes me a little worrisome to sign a guy like that for $25 million a year. Now, had the Braves done it, I'd be ecstatic. I'd be like with all of you, but I just don't know that I would have loved that move. So the Cardinals go and get their guy. Look, 3 years, 25. It's not terrible. Looking at the market and everything, it's probably about 25 more million or 15 more million more than I probably wanted to give him. I put out a post on social media this afternoon. I had lined up the expected stats from this past year for Sonny Gray and Kenta Maeda. Very similar. Now, Gray is younger. He's been more durable, and he hasn't exactly been durable in his career. But again, I just think there's a very real scenario where Sonny Gray pitches more like a number 3 starter than a number 1 or even a number 2 starter for the duration of this contract. So again, would I be excited if the Braves would have done that deal? Yes, but at the same time, it's not exactly a move that I would have loved. It's not the move that's going to blow me away. I'm still got my hopes on Yamamoto. I think that's a pipe dream. Ohtani's even more of a pipe dream, but trading for a Cease, trading for a Burns, that's what I'm looking for. And some of you may not believe that Cease is better than Sonny Gray, and I understand that. I think there's arguments that can be made for that. But Julie C asking who I would like, those are still some of the pitchers I'm holding out for. Yamamoto, or a trade for Cease or Burns, somebody like that, somebody that has that dominant top of the rotation type of potential. That's still what I'm hoping for. And I think if you're not going to get that, then just take the quantity guys, take the deals that the Cardinals have, been taking with Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson's, and just fill out the back of that rotation, and then just hope and pray that when you get to the postseason, Spencer Strider, Max Fried, and Charlie Morton are all healthy this time. Look, knock on wood, it can't happen 3 years in a row, right? Where you have two of your top pitchers either injured, sick, whatever it may be, going into the postseason. That's a lot to ask for over the course of 162 game season, to have all your pitchers healthy and ready to go. But again, I feel like if they're not going to get one of those top guys that you feel really comfortable about, then just go for some quantity moves and add to that depth and try to get through a 162 game season that way. See, Hayden Harris says, what about Brian Wu instead of Miller or Gilbert? I think they're all those guys in the mix. Wu and Miller, they got a lot more control, maybe a lot more, but they have more control over them. Again, I just don't see what the Braves could offer the Mariners for any of those guys, as they're certainly looking for offense. Peter D'Amico, Jake, what do you think about waiting until next year's trade deadline to see who else may be available? I'm assuming you're talking about the 2024 deadline. I think that's certainly a possibility. And even the Brewers have hinted at the fact that they may go into this season, hold on to Burns, hold on to Freddie Peralta, see if they can contend, and then maybe trade at the deadline where, their return that they're going to get is probably, especially for Burns, probably going to be about the same. So, yeah, I think there could be some very good options at the trade deadline as well, and it might make some sense to wait till then. I think Glasnow's, he's on the clock. He's got to go now. Dylan Cease doesn't have to with the extra year of control. I think the White Sox could get a similar package at the trade deadline, but I do think they probably deal him this offseason. Again, it's all kind of what can the team get now compared to what they think they can get at the deadline. Amo Potter says, I'm hoping for Yamamoto or Cease or both. I don't think it would be both, but definitely hoping for one of those. Nick C said sign Kershaw. I think Kershaw's at the point where it's Dodgers or he's done. Drew Phillips says Erod or Stroman. I'd be fine with either one of those guys, but again, neither one of those signings are going to excite me. In my mind, those are depth moves. Those are guys with number 3 potential. Maybe Stroman and Erod at times this past year pitched a little bit better than that, but those aren't guys that really move the needle for me in my mind. I don't put either one of them, obviously not over Strider or a healthy Fried, and I think they're probably right there with a healthy Morton. So again, those aren't guys that really kind of move the needle for me. Same as Spencer Thompson talking about Flaherty and Giolito. Again, I would like those for depth if you can get them for cheap and help them kind of turn things around. But again, those aren't moves that excite me. Yamamoto, Cease, Corbin Burns, those are deal. Even Tyler Glass now, even though I said, I wouldn't give up a lot to do it. If they did make that deal, I'd be ecstatic, because when he's healthy, which is key for all pitchers, he's a top of the rotation type of guy. Hayden Harris, seems like with all the roster spots, it's going to be signings, but Braves tend to make trades instead. So I'm a little confused. You're going to see a lot of these final roster spots filled out with guys making league minimum, guys making $1 million, $2 million bucks. Not all of these are going to be big deals. Peter D'Amico, Luis Severino on a 1-year price, contract. I've mentioned Luis Severino several times this offseason. I just think that makes a lot of sense. Give him a 1-year, $8 million deal. See if he can turn things around. Lex Rollins, is Max Fried healthy? As far as I know, he is. Again, it was just blister issues for him at the end of the year. When he pitched and didn't have the blister issues, he looked as good as he did before the forearm problems that he had. So, again, once he came back from that injury, he looked like Max Fried, which gives me a little bit of hope that was nothing. But certainly anytime you're hurt in that area, going to give you a little bit of concern. A couple of other moves were made on Monday that I wanted to mention. Jason Hayward returning to the Dodgers on a 1-year deal for $9 million. Mentioned him as a possibility for the Braves. And at that $9 million mark, he gives you similar production to what Eddie Rosario gives you last year. Good defense, hit well against righties last year. So I thought it would have been a good fit for the Braves. Bring him back home, but made sense for him to go back to the Dodgers, play with Freddie, and a place where he had somewhat of a resurgent season last year. Kenta Maeda, who I mentioned earlier, kind of comparing him to Sonny Gray, he gets 2 years, $24 million with the Tigers. So again, you compare those expected stats for Kenta Maeda and Sonny Gray last year, they're pretty similar, but Gray got 3 years, $75 million. Maeda got 2 years, $24 million. So we're kind of in that territory where do you really go all in on somebody like a Sonny Gray or a Jordan Montgomery even, or do you take a chance on some of those guys in that tier below who have the potential to have seasons just as good as those guys? That's kind of in the tier that we're at here when we're talking about some of these starting pitchers. So that's why it doesn't really get me all that excited if the Braves had been the ones to sign Sonny Gray. So again, maybe I'm in the minority in that. I know some of you out there just want to see the Braves and Alex Anthopoulos make a move no matter what, and I get that. But again, Alex Anthopoulos does a lot of his work early in the offseason. Would not be a surprise if it's a long while before we see another move made, especially if it's going to be a trade. Trades are probably going to take a little bit longer here to get going. Noah S., what's your thoughts on Taylor Trammell in left field? Hometown guy, don't have to spend too much, and the Braves can help him at the plate. Haven't heard much on Taylor Trammell in a long time. Know he was a former top prospect back in the day, but I honestly don't even know where he's at this moment and if he would be a good fit, but I can't imagine he'd be too expensive at the moment, especially being a negative 0.4 WAR player last year. Could the Braves turn things around? Yes, but he's hit 168 at the big league level so far and 304 at bats, so that'd be a big ask to turn things around there. Let's see, a couple more questions here before we wrap things up. Lex Rollins, what top of the rotation pitchers will be available next year? I was looking at this earlier today. I think it's Max Scherzer, Max Fried, obviously Zach Wheeler is one that'd be available, and one that I wish the Braves would have gotten last time around. That is the one, long-term starting pitching deal that's really worked out. Garrett Cole has an opt-out. Chris Sale has a club option that probably won't get picked up. Robbie Ray has an opt-out. Tyler Glasnow will be a free agent. So those are some of the key names, just looking quickly at who could be available next offseason. Merrill Kelly has a club option that likely gets picked up. Freddie Peralta has a club option that gets picked up. So Corbin Burns, obviously, coming off as well. Shane Bieber, Walker Buehler, Nick Pivetta. So there are actually some really good names coming off becoming free agents next offseason that the Braves could go after. So it should be a pretty good class. But again, all signs are pointing towards Max Fried not coming back. You got to find a way to fill that gap for the future. If you really just are at the point where nothing's going to work out there, whether it's this offseason or next offseason, got to find something to fill that gap for Max Fried at the top of the rotation. That will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. Thanks so much for joining, whether live, watching the replay. Appreciate you so much, all your support here at Locked On Braves. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button. Appreciate you. If you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio, however you watch or listen to Locked On Braves, thank you for all your support. Make sure you follow us on social media at LockedOn_Braves and at Shortstop Ball. Make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.